Hey, good to see you again. Merry Christmas, by the way. Hope you're doing well, staying warm. Maybe got some family around. Some good food on the table. Before we dive into today's story, let me just say this. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? A personal invitation from Santa. Well, consider this. Hit that subscribe button like it owes you money. Because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming on this channel. We're keeping it real, keeping it honest, and keeping it interesting. Now, let's get into it. So NATO, that big alliance that's been around since 1949, the one that's supposed to keep Europe and North America safe, the one that's supposed to be this unshakable bond between democracies. Yeah, that one, well, right now, it's going through what some are calling a defining moment. And a lot of that has to do with Donald Trump. Again, I know you're probably thinking, Jimmy, here we go again with Trump. But listen, this is serious stuff. We're talking about a $2 trillion military alliance that is suddenly facing questions it hasn't had to deal with in decades, just between you and me. I've been watching this unfold, and it's wild. Trump has been making waves, again, about NATO, about defense spending, about who pays what, and whether the United States should even be as committed as it has been. And Europe, well, Europe is nervous, really nervous, because if the U.S. starts pulling back, or even just talking about pulling back, the whole foundation of this alliance starts to shake. And when that happens, you've got countries scrambling, trying to figure out what comes next. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just here to walk you through what's happening, why it matters, and what it could mean for all of us. Because whether you like Trump or not, whether you think NATO is essential or outdated, this story affects you. It affects global security, it affects the economy, it affects the world we live in. So buckle up, because we've got a lot to cover. And trust me, by the end of this, you're going to have a much clearer picture of what's really going on behind the scenes. Let's go. All right, let's get into the context here. NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, has been the cornerstone of Western defense for over 7 decades. It was created right after World War II to counter the Soviet threat. And it's been the glue holding Europe and North America together ever since. The basic idea, an attack on one member is an attack on all. It's collective defense, and it's worked pretty well. Until now. So what's changed? Well, Trump's been talking about NATO for years. Even during his first term, he was vocal about how he felt the U.S. was footing too much of the bill. While European countries weren't pulling their weight, he wasn't wrong about the numbers. Many NATO members weren't hitting that. 2% of GDP defense spending target that they all agreed to, but the way he talked about it, let's just say it made a lot of allies uncomfortable. He questioned the value of the alliance, floated the idea of pulling out, and basically treated NATO like a bad business deal. Fast forward to now, and Trump's rhetoric hasn't softened. Reports suggest he's once again raising questions about NATO's relevance, about whether the U.S. should continue its leadership role, and whether Europe needs to step up in a much bigger way. And here's the thing, Europe is listening, but they're not just listening, they're reacting. Some countries are ramping up their defense budgets. Others are talking about forming their own European defense initiatives, and everyone's trying to figure out what a post-American NATO might look like, aconed to analysts. This is creating a real crisis of confidence. NATO's strength has always been in its unity, in the idea that the U.S. has Europe's back and vice versa, but when the leader of the most powerful member starts openly questioning that commitment, it shakes everything. And we're not just talking about hurt feelings, we're talking about real strategic consequences. If European countries can't count on the U.S., they have to rethink their entire defense posture. That costs money, time, and political capital. And hey, if you're finding this interesting, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and it makes sure you don't miss any of these deep dives. All right, let's keep going. So, how are people reacting to all this? Well, it's a mixed bag, and it depends on where you're looking. Let's start with Europe. Multiple outlets indicate that European leaders are genuinely worried. You've got France's Emmanuel Macron talking about strategic autonomy, which is basically code for we can't rely on the US forever. You've got Germany ramping up its defense spending after years of being criticized for underfunding its military. Poland and the Baltic states are in full alarm mode because they're on the front lines with Russia, and they need NATO to be strong and united. Then you've got the other side, Trump supporters. They look at this and say, finally, someone's holding Europe accountable. Why should American taxpayers subsidize Europe's defense when they can afford to pay their own way? And honestly, there's some merit to that argument. The numbers don't lie. Europe has been underspending on defense for a long time, and the US has been picking up the slack. So, from that perspective, Trump's just being the tough negotiator, right? Shaking things up to get a better deal. But here's where it gets tricky. Just between you and me, there's a difference between tough negotiation and undermining an alliance that's kept the peace for 70 years. NATO isn't just a financial arrangement, as a political and strategic one. It's about trust, about shared values, about showing adversaries like Russia and China that the West is united. When you start publicly questioning that, you give those adversaries an opening. They see division and they exploit it. Political reactions in the US are divided too. Democrats and some Republicans are defending NATO, saying it's essential to American security and global stability. Others are echoing Trump, saying it's time for Europe to grow up and take responsibility. And the public, well, a lot of Americans are tired of endless foreign commitments. They hear $2 trillion alliance and think, why are we spending that when we've got problems at home? It's a fair question. Even if the answer is more complicated than it seems, the media has been all over this too. You've got some outlets calling it a crisis, others calling it long overdue reform. And honestly, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. This is a pivotal moment, no doubt about it. But whether it's a disaster or an opportunity depends on what happens next. Let's dig a little deeper into what's really going on behind the scenes. NATO's budget is around $2 trillion. When you add up all the defense spending of its member countries, the US accounts for a huge chunk of that, roughly 70%. That's a lot. And Trump's point has always been, why is the US paying so much when countries like Germany, France, and others have strong economies and can afford to contribute more? It's not an unreasonable question. But here's what people sometimes miss. The US doesn't just spend that money for Europe's sake. It spends it for its own strategic interests, having bases in Europe, having allies who share intelligence, having a united front against adversaries. That's valuable to the US. It's not charity, it's strategic investment. So when Trump frames it as the US getting ripped off, it oversimplifies a complex reality. Now, reports suggest that behind closed doors there's been a lot of scrambling. European defense ministers have been meeting, trying to figure out contingency plans. What if the US really does scale back? What if Trump wins another term and makes good on his threats? They're looking at everything from increased defense budgets to new European defense coalitions that don't rely on the US as much. Some analysts even speculate that this could lead to a more militarized Europe, which is kind of ironic given that NATO was supposed to prevent that. There's also the Russia angle. Vladimir Putin is watching all of this very closely. A divided NATO is exactly what he wants. If the alliance fractures, or even just weakens, it gives Russia more room to maneuver in Eastern Europe. That's not speculation. That's just basic geopolitics. So when Trump criticizes NATO publicly, Putin wins. Whether Trump intends that or not is a different question. But the effect is the same. And hey, if you're still with me, and I hope you are, go ahead and hit that like button. It really does help. All right, let's bring this home. So what does all of this mean going forward? Well, the stakes are high. If NATO weakens or fractures, we could be looking at a much more unstable world. Europe would have to rearm, which is expensive and politically difficult. The U.S. would lose influence in Europe, which could shift the global balance of power. Russia and China would see opportunities to expand their influence. It's not a pretty picture. But there's another scenario. Maybe this pressure from Trump forces a real reckoning in Europe. Maybe countries finally step up, increase their defense spending, and create a more balanced alliance where the U.S. isn't carrying such a disproportionate load. In that case, NATO could come out stronger. It's possible. Whether it's likely is another question. According to some observers, the next few years are going to be critical if Trump returns to office, or even if his rhetoric continues to dominate Republican policy. We could see a fundamental shift in how the U.S. engages with NATO. If that happens, Europe will have to decide, do we go it alone, or do we find a way to meet the U.S. halfway? Either way, the old model where the U.S. leads and Europe follows is probably over. Just between you and me, I think this is a defining moment, not just for NATO, but for the entire post-World War II order. We're living through a time when the assumptions that have guided global politics for decades are being questioned. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's long overdue, or maybe we're opening a Pandora's box that we're going to regret. Time will tell. What I do know is this: these decisions affect all of us, whether you're in New York or New Mexico, whether you care about foreign policy or not. The stability of NATO impacts your life. It affects the global economy, it affects security, it affects the world your kids and grandkids are going to inherit. So yeah, it's worth paying attention to. Before I let you go, do me one last favor. If you found this valuable, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I promise to keep bringing you honest, thoughtful analysis on the stories that matter. No hype, no nonsense, just the real deal. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.